Today's topic is making the most of your memory. And it is indeed a topic that we get a lot of questions about. So we will have a 20 to 35-minute presentation, followed by a few minutes of questions and answers. And it is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Gail Eskies, who is a clinical neuropsychologist and a professor at Dalhousie University. Gail received her PhD in psychology from the University of California, Berkeley, but came to Canada for postdoctoral training and clinical training at Dalhousie and at the Rotman Research Institute at the Baycrest Home for Geriatric Care in Toronto. In addition to her past clinical activities at the QE2 Health Sciences Centre in Halifax, Dr. Eskies is an active educator and researcher focused on developing assessment and treatment tools to maximize cognitive health in aging and aging-related disorders. So we've all noticed changes in memory as we get older, and so today's presentation will help you understand what memory is, how it works, and how it can be affected by aging. And Gail will also have some tips for us for enhancing our own memories and supporting the memories of others. So welcome, Gail. We're delighted to have you here with us today.
Thanks, Beth, and thanks to you and to the Alzheimer's Society for inviting me to talk about one of my very favorite topics. And I'd also like to thank everyone in the audience for their interest and in joining us. So as Beth said, today we're going to talk about making the most of your memory. And if I can get my slides to advance, here is our roadmap of what we're going to go through. So first I'm going to do a little bit on a user's guide to memory, what is memory and how it works. And then what happens to memory as we get older. And then finally, a little bit on how can memory be improved. And as Beth said, please feel free to send your questions to us in the chat, and I'll be very happy to deal with them at the end. So first of all, what is memory? Well, the brain is automatically recording all of your experiences as they happen. It picks up all of these events. And under the right circumstances, the details of these events are stored throughout your brain. And the key thing here is that a memory is not necessarily stored in one place like you would store something in a filing cabinet. A memory, or a memory trace, as we call it as well, is actually in a network of areas in the brain that were initially involved in recording the experience. So you've got your memories scattered throughout the brain. And these are all, a particular event is then all connected together as that event in your brain. What's really important about memory, and I think why we're also involved in it and want to know more about it, is that it's really a foundation to a lot of ourselves and our ability to do things like mentally time travel. So you can use your memory to think backwards and think about what's happened to you in your past life, and what happened yesterday and what happened when you were younger. And it also allows us to predict about what might happen tomorrow based on what did happen yesterday, and think about what's going to happen next year and make plans and think about how we're going to get to where we want to go as we go along in our lives. So it's a really important function. It also gives us our memories of our daily events and how things happen, what happened to us, what we did. That gives us our foundation for our sense of self and our identity. So when memory starts to fade, it can have really important and potentially devastating consequences for just who we think we are and how we feel about ourselves. So memory is a crucial part of ourselves as human beings. So I have a little thought experiment for you right now. So I just want you to think to yourselves about this. What did you have for dinner on Sunday? Just think about that for a second. Sunday was a few days ago now, so try to think back time travel backwards and think about what was on the table. Now, where did you go to high school? Can you remember where that was? What is the capital of Saskatchewan? Can you remember? What is a capital? What does that mean? What does that word mean? Where is the B on the keyboard? And finally, how do you ride a bicycle? So when you think about those things, what I'm trying to do is to illustrate the different kinds of memories that we have. And we have many kinds. We have three main categories of memories. And the first memory type is what is part of our life's episodes, the recent episodes like dinner on Sunday, the more remote episodes like where you went to high school. And all of these events are stored with a lot of detail and context. So if you think about to a past dinner, you might have memories of who was there, what it was, their music playing, how did the food taste, was it visually appealing, how did you feel about it, who were the people, your emotions about those people and how you feel about them. So you have a lot of rich detail associated with this event. And in memories such as more remote things like your high school and where you went to high school, some of the details may fade, but you've still got this perhaps emotional attachments. You still may remember a number of things about your high school. Who was your favorite teacher? Where it was? Did you like it? Who were your friends? So there's lots of details associated with these life episodes. And we call this type of memory episodic memory. And this is the kind of memory that we think about when we're talking about our memory, this autobiographical memory, or this memory of what we've done and what happened to us during our lives. So that's the main kind of memory. And we'll be focusing mostly on that one. But there are other kinds of memory that are important to us as well. And the next one is something that's called semantic memory. And it's your memory for facts and words. So these are things you learned at school. So Regina is the capital of Saskatchewan. Oh, I have it. I put it on Winnipeg. So there you go. There's my first mistake. But Regina is the capital of Saskatchewan. So it's a fact. You don't necessarily have a context around that fact, unless there was a really embarrassing event like this, where you put the circle around the wrong province. You wouldn't really remember any details about learning that Regina is the capital of Saskatchewan. But it's a fact that kind of pops into your head. And what does the word capital mean? Well, it actually means a lot of things. It could mean the seat of government, it could mean money, it could mean a type of crime, like for capital punishment, or it's used to begin a sentence. So these are all facts about words, and they're stored in different places than the episodic memories are. But we use these memories in order to help our episodic memory, because this type of memory gives us understanding about the world. And it helps us remember details about the world that gives us the context for our episodic memory. And the final kind of big category of memory is something called procedural memory. And this is also could be thought of as motor memories or habit memories. And these are memories about skills that you've developed over time with practice, like typing on the keyboard. And probably when you had to think about where is the B, what you had to do was move your finger sort of to think about where would I find the B on that keyboard. And when you think about how do I ride a bicycle, it's really much better expressed by actually miming how you would ride it rather than being able to tell anyone how to ride it. And if you ever tried to teach anyone how to ride a bike, you find that it's very difficult to explain it. They just have to try it. and figure out on their own as they go along. So these habit memories or motor memories actually also form quite a foundation to our behavior, because lots of times we're working on habit by habit memories. And they also form a lot of foundation to much of our daily schedules, in terms of not having to really think about doing things that we do all the time. So when you're typing, you don't have to literally think about, okay, the B is there, I'm going to press that. You actually become pretty fluent if you've had a lot of experience in typing. And the same with playing the piano or a musical instrument. It's very hard at first, but with practice, that motor memory takes over. And these procedural memories then help us with playing out the day as we go along. So now I just want to focus on what makes a good memory. What are the steps to a good memory? And the first step is you have to receive the information. You have to take it in. It's through your senses, usually, and you either see it or you hear it or you taste it. And so that would be the first memory. The second step to a good memory is the recording of the memory. And I'm going to go through all of these steps in a minute. And then the third step is retrieving it. So you have to get it back out again for it to be anything useful. So these three steps all form the basis of making memories and using them successfully. And knowing how each of these work and how you can enhance each of these steps can then help you improve your memory, or help with understanding and helping out with someone else's memory and supporting someone else who might have difficulty with memory. So let's go over each of these steps in order. So receiving. So receiving is the first part. That's the gate in. And, we have so much information coming at us from the outside. There's so many things going on. And we have so many thoughts on the inside. We're constantly ruminating and thinking about things. And your brain actually has an automatic filter that works to limit how much of all of this it actually takes in. And so what it's not paying attention to isn't going to become memory. So the critical elements are the attention part, that is, the brain is paying attention to that information or the event, and then the processing of that information. So attention puts the spotlight on what it is you might want to remember or what's going on. And then the brain, through your knowledge, through your semantic memory, then needs to think about it. It needs to comprehend what's going on. It needs to process it. And the more it thinks about it, the more you think about it, the more you connect to it, the more you kind of integrate it in with what you already know, it creates that brain activation that's going to become a very rich memory network or memory trace to help you remember it later. The other thing is, the more you pay attention and the more you process, the stronger the memory is going to be, and the stronger it's going to be laid down, and then the easier it will be to retrieve it. So that's the receiving, and we'll talk a little bit about how you might enhance these kinds of things in a little bit. Now, recording. I mentioned that recording happens by creating a network. Well, this network actually happens because the cells in your brain are changing, and they're actually creating connections. And all of these little shiny spots here are different cells that have connected up to this brain cell. So there are thousands and thousands. There's probably more connections in the brain than there are stars in the Milky Way galaxy. And it's all of these connections that create those networks that make the memory, underlie your memory. And I put up the name Heb here because I like talking about our local famous people. So Donald Hebb was from Chester, Nova Scotia, and he's one of the most famous neuroscientists who coined the term cells that fire together, wire together. So he was the first person to start the idea that when cells are active together, when they're receiving information together, they actually make structural changes to connect up together so that the next time it's easier to activate that network. These changes aren't going to happen instantly, and they take time, days, months, sometimes years. And that's why we have to work at our memories. And when we want to remember lots of material, you have to actually make efforts to do that. And recording is often interrupted. It's interrupted by brain disorders and diseases like Alzheimer's or brain injury. It's interrupted by stress. It's interrupted by medications. It's interrupted by lack of sleep, or just about anything that interferes with brain health. So it's important to keep that in mind when you're trying to enhance recording. And I'll talk about some tips later. So the final thing is you have a memory network in there, but how are you going to get it out? How are you going to remember anything? So the next thing is the retrieving step. And the critical thing about retrieving is that it's actually a very active process as well. And the way a memory is retrieved is by recreating that activation of the network that initially laid it down, that initially was stored. So it's not just, consulting a tiny little piece of the brain, it's actually activating all of the brain that was connected up when you initially had the experience. So it's effortful, and you have to work at it sometimes when you're trying to retrieve things. More attention and processing at the receiving end can also boost that ability to retrieve it later, because it'll create a richer network that's easier to reactivate. And also, which is really interesting, and we can use this as a strategy, each time you retrieve a memory, it's recorded again, and it's so you have a better recording. So each time when I recommend to my students, I say when you are trying to study your material, I want you to test yourself. And I want you to put your hand over the page and test yourself on what does this paragraph say. Each time they retrieve that successfully, they're recording it again and they're making their memory for it stronger. Okay, so that's the 3 steps to a memory, and that's a bit how each of them works. Now, I have good news and I have some not so good news about memory as we get older. So here's the only graph I'm going to show in this talk. And what I wanted to illustrate here, and let me just put on my little laser pointer. Here is a line that represents age. So here are the 20s, here you are in your 20s, and here you are in your 80s. And this line represents how well people do on tests of memory. This line here at 0 is about average. So what I want you to notice here is that in your 20s, your episodic memory, that's that memory for life experiences, and what we call working memory, which is really your ability to pay attention and to process those experiences, it's doing really well. You've got super abilities in general in that area. In the 20s, however, your semantic memory, that is your facts and words, it's not quite as established yet because you haven't learned everything. You're still going to school. You're still learning things from life. So it's actually a little lower. As we get older, see what happens. The episodic memory and the working memory starts to decline into your 80s. Now notice that that decline actually starts around 30s. So it starts, it's pretty, we don't happen to notice it there because it's still above average, but there is some decline if you were to carefully test people. So that's sort of the not so good news. The good news, though, is that look at this semantic memory. It's getting stronger. We're getting smarter as we get older. So you can use this semantic memory, this ability to think and reason and integrate and comprehend those types of skills using your semantic memory can be used to improve your episodic memory because it's still nice and strong. So let's get into some of the tips. So memory can be improved. Good memory, though, is a skill. I think, when you're in your 20s, when it's so good, you sort of take it for granted. You think, oh yeah, I just have to read something or I have to listen to something and I'm going to remember it. And in your 20s, that's not such a bad way to go until you get to university when you realize there's so much stuff you have to actually work at it. But it is a skill. And many of these tips I'm talking to you about are actually tips that we tell students as well as others. The skill requires understanding how memory works, and now you know a little bit more about that, and also practice because it's an effortful skill. You have to really think about it and you have to really work at it. So remember I said we have 3 steps: receiving, recording, and retrieving. So let's see what kinds of skills we can pick up to help with each of those. What about receiving? Well, it's that intention. It's that needing to decide, I have to remember this. So that intention then brings attention to what you want to remember. And then you use your strong semantic memory to link it to what you know and how you feel about it. So if you're trying to remember, say, what the movie was all about or a book that you're reading, if you think about, what happened in the book and you sort of review it in your mind and think about, oh, that makes sense. Well, why did she do that? Or I didn't like the way that this person acted. And if you just mull over it and think about it, that'll be easier. It'll be an easier way to remember something. And that may be why book clubs are so popular, because when you talk about a book, it's easier to remember it. We also talk about see it, say it, and write it. So the more modalities you experience something, the more you're going to remember it because you're creating a richer network. More areas of the brain are involved. And so when you want to remember things, then writing it down will help you visualize it as well as thinking about it. And simple things like, remembering that you turn the stove off or you lock the door. I have often counseled people to just say it out loud. Just say, hey, I've locked the door today. And that will make it easier to remember that you've done it today. And that's sort of why, all our key fobs for our cars now make a chirp when we lock the car. So they're using that tip that if you hear it, then you're more likely to be able to remember that you locked the car. The other thing you can do is use mnemonics to link the material to what you already know. And this is a really good way to remember pins and passwords, which are, I think, the bane of many of our existences. Not only do we have to create them, then some things even make us change them every now and then. So how can you use mnemonics, or how can you use your semantic memory and what you already know to help with making a pin or a password? Well, here's an example of a pin. So what if your pin, you wanted to set up your pin as 4245? Well, if you look at your keyboard here, 4 is G, 2 is A, 4 is I, and L is a 5. So now if I want to do 4245 for a pin, then all I have to remember is Gail. Now, I don't recommend you using your name for a pin, but this is the idea here, is that it's much easier to remember something that makes sense that you can relate to than if it's an arbitrary set of 4 digits. Now, another way to use it would be to use the 4 digits of an old, not a current, an old telephone number that you remember, that you can just immediately draw up, retrieve, because you used to live there for a very long time. But what the key here is that you've linked those numbers to something that has meaning, that is meaningful to you, that's easier to retrieve. Now, what about those pesky, oh, I need so many numbers and letters and things, passwords? Well, here's a password for your bank. What I do is I try to think of, well, what song do I relate to my bank? So think about this one, the Beatles song, You Never Give Me Your Money. For me, the Beatles are, they really are something that form a major part of my growing up, and I know all their songs. And so if you can come up with a song, perhaps, that you can relate to, that relates to the need for the password, like the bank, then here is a really, this is a good password that if you were just to look at that, you'd go, oh my God, how would I ever remember that? But if you know it's You Never Give Me Your Money, you can just, it's much easier to remember. And then I always find a symbol, you can put it at the beginning or the end, that sort of stands for whatever the organization is for the password. So like the $ sign. Now you have to pick your own method, and then you have to stick to it. So remember, I talked about habit memories. Well, finding methods like this, like I'm going to use songs. I'm always going to put a funny symbol at the beginning, or I'm always going to put it at the end, or you can put it at both. But you create a process like that, and if you do it all the time, then it's going to get easier and easier to remember when you have to create these passwords. Okay, recording. What helps you record better? Getting better sleep, getting exercise, decreasing stress. This is all about improving the health of your brain. So, these are the kinds of things, the better diets, etc. These are the kinds of things that can improve your brain's ability to create connections and to lay down those networks for your memory. What about retrieving? Well, there are just some things that just make sense to just make a list and to use a calendar and write it on your calendar, or to set an alarm, or to write a note and put it on your door. Don't forget, your umbrella tomorrow when you know it's going to rain. So some of these things are just better at developing these sort of what we call external cues to remind you to do these things. And here again, this is where routines and habits can be important. So if you always put your keys in the little, in the bowl on the table when you come in, then you'll be able to find them. And that habit of doing that is a way to support your retrieving, their memory of where you can find your keys. I am constantly losing my phone. I carry it around with me and I set it down in so many places. And so that's just not very conducive to remembering where my phone is. So you have to develop some routines and habits. And I'm starting to learn now, when I put my phone down, I have to actually say to myself, okay, I put it down there, or I put it in my pocket, and then I know I can find it. And the final thing is something called space retrieval, which is about that testing yourself that I mentioned. If you continue to test yourself over time, then that is going to lay down that memory again. That's going to help with the recording, and it's going to help with retrieval later. So sometimes if I want to remember, oh, I parked my car in row, in floor D3, then besides just writing it down, which you also can do, you could also just test yourself and say, okay, D3. A few seconds later, oh, it's D3. A minute or so later, D3. And just occasionally test yourself, and that would also help you remember. So to wrap up, we've talked about different types of memory: the episodic memory of your daily life events, your episodes, your semantic memory of your facts and words, and your procedural memory or habit memory of things that you learned through motor practice, etc. Different forms of memory are affected by aging. So the episodic memory is the most affected, but your semantic memory, facts and words, can get better. And your procedural memory doesn't decay, but it might get a little harder to learn new motor memories as you get older. The 3 R's to a good memory: receiving it, recording it, and retrieving it. And understanding each step gives you clues to how to strengthen yours or someone else's memory. And then let me just leave you with a final note here. No one has a perfect memory. The key here is to think about what's important. And then I recommend that you just let the rest of it go and not worry about it. So that's the end. And I just want to mention, we'll be doing an online memory bootcamp series starting on November 8th. So this is a 3-session series that will be developing these ideas and these tips and tricks even more. So if this is something that is still of interest to you and you want to go further in it, then you can email me. My email is on the screen there. And I will also leave the information with Beth. And if you want to email her, you can find out more about it and how to register. And thank you for your attention. I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you very much, Gail. That was fascinating. A lot of great information, lots to think about, and some great tips. I really like the one about saying it out loud. That intention, being more mindful of it. I've also heard of someone using their Google Home or their Alexa and saying, Alexa, I left my keys on the dining room table. And then when you say later, Alexa, where are my keys? She will tell you.
You're kidding. I never tried that. I have a Google one. I'll have to give that a try. I love that.
Yeah. And so, yeah. And again, it's that intention of, focusing and paying attention and using those tips and tricks. And I think as we all get older, your graph showed that, we do have to figure out better ways to keep our memory sharp and to use our memories. So we do have a couple of questions. So we have one question wondering about surgery and their cognitive health, and they've heard that sometimes surgeries can impact their memory and their cognition after, and how to help it get it back into working order.
Yeah. So in terms of surgery, it's I think the thing about surgery is to normalize your expectations about how much time it'll take you to recover. And especially as we get older, I think, if you've had some major surgery, really, you shouldn't expect to be back to your best level until 6 months to a year. And so what I would recommend is focusing on your physical health, getting that good sleep, getting your brain back in order, and optimizing your brain health. So sleep, exercise is a really good way to enhance memory, and there's been a lot of studies on that. And eating right, and you know, not worrying too much about it until later. And I would really recommend focusing on, you know, also mental health and your social, whatever helps, you know, works for you in terms of your social life, and really relaxing and just taking care of yourself. And then if time goes on and you still feel like you're not as sharp, there's a couple of things you can do. You can talk to your doctor and maybe do a little, go further with that realm. Or, you know, none of these tips uh, or all of these tips will work no matter what. So these kinds of things would also be, you know, useful for someone after surgery if they are still experiencing problems in 6 months or a year. But really, I think we all feel a little vulnerable right after surgery, and we think, oh, you know, I should be better now. It's been 3 weeks. Come on. And really, any kind of surgery is very stressful, and not to expect too much right away, and be kind to yourself.
Oh, good. I think that's really helpful to know that, that we should have realistic expectations, and not to jump right into thinking we're going to be back to our old selves immediately, especially as we get a little older and we're a little slower to recover from things. So
Yeah,
it's great, I think, to bring it, have a more normal, realistic expectations of just how quickly we should be recovering.
yeah, for
Yeah.
sure.
So we do have another question. Um, from time to time, you hear that certain foods are really good for your memory, or there's a new trend, or a new miracle food that we should be eating. Is there anything that will actually help improve your memory when it comes to food?
Yeah, I get that asked that question a lot. And first, let me just say there's no quick fix for your memory. I mean, all of these things are, um, you know, things that you have to think about in terms of, you know, building your skills for memory. In terms of what should I eat for my memory, really there isn't a lot of good evidence for any specific nutritional element that can improve your memory per se. The best thing I would recommend for improving your memory, or at least maintaining it, would be eating following the food guide and making sure that your brain is healthy and your body is healthy. So, you know, we're talking about the types of recommendations like the Mediterranean diet, eating lots of good, healthy fish, reducing your intake of fats, or at least the bad fats, reducing meat intake, getting lots of leafy vegetables and fruits, and really following the standard guidelines that we have. And the healthier your body is and the healthier your brain is, the better, you know, your memory will be and your brain will function better. And you know, if you really feel like you need, you know, what's one thing I can do to help my memory from a physical point of view, you know, in addition to eating right, it's really that exercise piece. And you know, we don't have to think of, you know, if we've been fairly sedentary and we're not used to being active. I'm not talking about, you know, suddenly going to the gym and working out 3 times a week. Um, Even just starting to get outside and walk around the block has been shown when people haven't been used to a lot of activity, that's been shown to have good benefits by itself. And we have to remember that our our brain and our body interact. So things that make our body unhealthy are going to also affect our brain. So things like high blood pressure, diabetes, um, uh, things that are, you know, your lipids, your cholesterol, all these things that your doctor is saying, you know, you got to be careful, we got to keep those in the right levels. Those are things that are known to also have effects on your brain as well, and your vascular system, which is your blood system that feeds your brain all the nutrients. And if you've got problems with your your circulation in your body, it's going to also affect your brain. So follow your doctor's advice and, try to stay as healthy as you can, and that will also help.
That's great. We talk a lot about the Mediterranean diet here
Yeah,
for
yeah,
for
yeah, for sure.
maintaining
Yeah,
brain health and
yeah,
those healthy fats and um, oils and nuts and things. So it's good to hear that other people are saying it as well.
yeah,
And we talk a lot about physical activity and social engagement. So it's good to have that reinforced.
yeah.
We actually have a request for you to show your wrap-up slide again.
Oh, okay. Let's see if we can.
Back up.
This one.
Yes, yeah.
Okay, yeah. As
Mm.
a way to repeat the information and to help people absorb it. So the boot camp series that I talked about will go through all of this again. And so we have 3 sessions, and the first session is really repeating a lot of this in a way to help reinforce these ideas. And then the next 2 sessions are about the tips and what kind of tips you can use to help help with receiving and retrieving in particular. And then we do have a little bit also on brain health and what you can do to improve your reporting. So
Good,
we do focus on this type of a model in the camp, the boot camp as well.
good.
And
So
it's done online. So we have lots of videos and things like that you can watch.
yeah, and so folks can get in touch with you with your email, or they can get in touch with us. Gail's
Yeah.
going to send me the information as well, so we can pass that along if anyone is interested. We do have another question. Is it true that our memory is worse these days from using more technology?
I get asked that a lot. So some people fear that if they're using their technology to write, to remind them to do everything, does that mean then that I'm not practicing my memory? I'm not using it, and it's gonna deteriorate. And I think another way to look at this instead is that the key to maintaining your cognitive function and your memory is to use it, and that's the concern. But my goodness, to learn to use technology is a feat in itself.
Mm,
So I think that the process of learning to use the technology by itself is a way to sharpen up your memory, because you have to remember what you need to do. And in addition, we have such busy lives, and there's so many things we have to remember that what this does is it helps us focus on the important things, right? And keep all those little details in that book or on that iPhone or whatever, and let that do that part, and then you can focus on the more important stuff. So I don't think it's a problem at all. Now, I think the other concern some people might have had is that, well, we can just Google anything. Why do we have to learn anything? And I think that's a different question, because I think that what that is the benefit of that is that it allows you to focus on things that you want to know. And you can spend your time on that, and then you can just retrieve all that other stuff if you need it. So again, I think it's a wise use of technology, and the learning to use the technology is actually a good thing. Now, the other cautionary note is if you spend all your time on the computer, you're not outside, you're not being active. So again, you should use, it's the balance. Everything is a balance. So use that technology, use your computer, focus on the important things, but also, my goodness, get outside and walk around a bit.
Yeah, and maybe you're using your technology to be social
Yes,
when
yeah,
we're not able to get together in person. But yeah, being social
yeah,
is important too for your
yeah.
brain health.
And we've learned so much over the last year, how to
Mm,
use Zoom, how to do all of that. my goodness, our brains have been really active with this technology. So, that's a good
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah, learning new skills is a good way
Yep,
to keep your brain sharp. And
right.
Zoom, and we've had to learn a lot of new things over the course of the last year.
It's all been a sharp learning curve.
Yeah, we do have another question. Someone's wondering how much sleep should we strive for as we age? Some
Yeah,
of us are getting up more often in the night. So how much sleep should we strive for?
yeah. If we were to figure that out, I think you'd get the Nobel Prize. Um, no one really knows what the ideal is. All we can tell you is what the epidemiology shows, and this is all correlations. And so it looks like 7 to 8 hours is sort of a cutoff point where um, below that, you're probably stressing your body a little. Above that, it's also not necessarily so good. But we don't know why. We don't know why more sleep is bad. And we also can't say that for everyone, less sleep is bad. It really is a very individual thing. And I know as we get older, sleep gets more disrupted. Sleep patterns actually do change. We don't go into as deep a sleep as we used to. So there's, I think the key is to give yourself, enough time to sleep. Recognize that sleep is a habit, just like the rest, everything else we do. So if you get up at 6:30, then get to bed in time to get those 7 hours or 8 hours. Don't just say, oh, I'm going to sleep in and make up for it if I go to bed at 2, right? Because you won't. Your body will wake up at 6:30. So keep in mind sort of the rhythm of the body. The other thing is there's lots of tricks for enhancing your sleep, like don't use the technology before you go to bed. Don't exercise before you go to bed. Find a routine that's very soothing and calming to help you go to sleep. And then at the end of the day, if you wake up at 2 or 3 and you can't go back to sleep, what the sleep specialists say is try not to worry about it. Get up,
Mm.
do a little something not very, stressful or not going to wake you up too much. Don't play an exciting video game, but maybe read a book that's familiar and just sort of is very soothing, and then try again in a little while. But don't stress over it. That's the guarantee to not go back to sleep. So I think there's a lot of different strategies there, and it is certainly one thing that we all struggle with as we go older. So you kind of have to find your own method there to help out.
Yeah. And we know as people go farther along the dementia journey, they may need more sleep
Yeah,
because their brains, as they're changing, they need more rest. And sleep is when we recharge our brain. So if their brain is having a tough time just getting through the day, then they may need to nap in the afternoon. They may need to sleep, much more than the 12 hour or the 8 hours that we regularly do.
yeah,
And at the
yeah,
same
and
time, they might have more disrupted sleep because of the changes in their brain patterns, like you were
that's
saying.
right. That's right. I know, wandering at night can be an issue for individuals who are further along in the dementia pathway. And, it's the, you trying to work with the body's circadian rhythm is a one thing to try is, set up the habits, set up the trying to do things the same way each day. That can also help sometimes. And following some of these tips about developing a routine. This is what always happens before you go to bed, and thinking along those lines might help.
Well, we're almost out of time. So I'd like to again thank you, Gail, for joining us today. great presentation and some really great questions from the audience. Thank you all for participating. Um, and I want to thank again everybody for joining us and for those of you who are registered so that you can watch afterwards. If you do have any questions afterwards, don't hesitate to give us a call here at the Alzheimer's Society at 1-800 611 6345. Or if you're up in the middle of the night and you can't get to sleep, send us an email and we'll be happy to get back to you in the morning. Don't hesitate to give us a call if you have any questions or comments. If you have any ideas about further presentations, you can always give us a call or send us an email with those as well. Or if you have any comments that you'd like to make in the chat box here today, we'll pass those along. We are going to have a quick poll that pops up just to gauge how useful you found this session today. I'm going to launch it. So if you don't mind filling that in, we do use it to help us judge how well we're doing and to help us develop further programs. So again, I'd like to thank everyone, Gail, you included, for joining us today. It's been a great afternoon, and we really appreciate you taking the time out of your busy schedule to join us today.
It's been my pleasure.
Thank you very much.
Bye for now.